going to give a brief summary, about 10 minutes, on our workshop that we had in early February, Arctic Change and Possible Influence on Mid-latitude Climate and Weather. So also I'll just have up here listed, I'll quickly go through the names of the organizers of the workshop. Myself, Jean Dong will speak later, Jennifer Francis, Thomas Young, Ron Kwok, and Jim Overland. So, you know, one of the main themes I think that came out of the workshop was how complicated, how lacking our knowledge is of Arctic amplification and the causes of it. But so briefly talk, you know, so that was a big topic at the workshop, and we're all very familiar with the fact that sea ice has been decreasing. So here I show a time series of September sea ice, which is in blue, and it's been declining. I guess it's about 2 standard deviations lower now than it was 30 years ago. And also equally as dramatic, spring Northern Hemisphere snow cover has been decreasing, and that's shown in the red. It's been decreasing at least as fast as the Arctic sea ice. And just want to point out, there is one component of the cryosphere that's bucking this downward trend, and that's especially fall, maybe fall and winter, Northern Hemisphere snow cover, and especially the month of October. There's been a robust trend over the satellite era in snow cover across the Northern Hemisphere, in particular in Siberia, just bringing that out. So that was talked about during the workshop, and we'll talk about it here. So here's look at Arctic amplification over the entire year, and there's a seasonality to Arctic amplification. So showing here the difference between the high and mid latitudes, and it peaks in the winter months and is almost disappears in the summer. So and that Arctic amplification, so it's the difference in the temperature warming between the temperature anomalies, right, between the Arctic and the mid latitudes. And so here's the past few years, and I got this from Jennifer Francis, but you can see that it's been accelerating, this Arctic amplification. Turns out, though, you know, so in a very simplistic way, and we all thought that, well, you know, you have less snow, you have less sea ice, much lower albedo, and that will lead to a warmer Arctic relative to other areas in the globe. But it turns out it's very, the actual reasons are not well understood. I mean, for one thing, you know, albedo is not really a factor in the winter, and that's when Arctic amplification is greatest. And here's just a recent paper that looked at Arctic amplification, and albedo actually is not one of in the conclusion from this paper. The albedo wasn't the largest contributor to Arctic amplification, but rather changes in temperature and the lapse rate, and there's also advection from lower latitudes, the atmospheric transport, and the ocean transport, and it's a very busy plot. But I guess I'm only trying to get across that there's very large uncertainty in what's causing Arctic amplification, and sea ice is actually not the biggest contributor to Arctic amplification. So now, given the fact that we do have Arctic amplification, even if we don't understand the full reasons, what are the potential impacts outside of it? Right? So it's not, you know, what happens in the Arctic, you know, does it stay in the Arctic or not? And that's certainly a big debate right now, but trying to see what might be one of the more robust mechanisms that how the Arctic might influence mid-latitudes, and it would be related to what I would call the warm Arctic, cold continents, or warm Arctic, cold Eurasia pattern. So one thing that I think everybody agreed that clearly that Arctic amplification is having, or this accelerated Arctic warming is having on the atmosphere, is a rising in geopotential heights. So geopotential heights is sensitive to temperature, is one of the main components. And here's, I'm just showing, I guess, the most recent year, the anomalies in this what's called polar cap. So the anomalies in geopotential height average over the entire polar caps from 60 north to the pole. And you can see that, you know, red showing warming or rising geopotential heights, and blue would be cooling or lowering geopotential heights. And on the bottom is the trend since in this era of Arctic amplification. I'll show that in a minute, but I think I have it. Hopefully I have it. But you can see that this warming or the raising of the geopotential heights is consistent throughout the year, and it's not. And what I think is what's really important is it's not right at in the lowest troposphere. It's not something that's confined to the boundary, but extends up into the upper troposphere. Gets to the tropopause, and even at times seems to extend into the stratosphere. And at that point, if it has this, if Arctic amplification is influencing the geopotential height all the way into at the jet stream level, this certainly increases the potential for influencing weather at lower latitudes. So if you look, here's like at the temperature trend from 1960, there's the winter temperature trend, before showing an annual plot, a daily plot throughout the entire year. But you see what you're going to get warming everywhere, so that's what we expect with global warming. And then you can see that the warming is accelerated or is a greater amplitude or magnitude in the higher latitudes over the Arctic. And this is what we call Arctic amplification. On the left, we see the temperature trend at each latitude, and it's warming everywhere, but then it really accelerates as once you get certainly north of 50, but certainly north of 60, right up to the pole. But it's turned out to be something very surprising. Well, I'm jumping the gun here, but if you look at the break it out to the time series of the temperature anomalies at the polar caps 60 to 90 north, and then also in the other latitudes, the mid-latitudes and the tropics, you can see that up to about 1990 they had the same trend. The trend, I mean, there was much larger variability in the Arctic, but the trend was very similar. But then since 1990, and my cursor's disappeared here, you can see that there's kind of this divergence in the temperature trends where the Arctic has been warming much more quickly than the other latitudes. And if you take the temperature trend now, not from 1960, but since this era of, or let's call this era of Arctic amplification, you get a very different picture where you get the strong warming in the Arctic, which is similar to 1960, but now you get this cooling in the mid-latitudes. And if you look at this temperature trend, you get slight warming trend in the subtropics, tropics, subtropics. You get strong warming and this accelerated warming in the Arctic, which we call Arctic amplification, but now you get this cooling in the mid-latitude. So very surprising result. So are they coupled? So this was not predicted by the models. This cooling in the mid-latitudes, and so is there some kind of coupling going on between the Arctic and the mid-latitude? So I talked about different mechanisms, but the one that we thought at the idea that was considered most robust at our workshop was that this Arctic loss is causing this high pressure over northern Eurasia, whether you call it, I mean, I've referred to it in the past as as kind of this northwestward extension of the Siberian High, but other research, other scientists have call it Euro blocking. So but they're all very, very similar and related. So that is really the one thing that I think everybody has had the most, the best consensus, that if there's an influence that then leads to changes in the weather patterns at lower latitudes, it's through this strengthening high pressure Siberian or Euro blocking. And then there can be some add-on effects. It's been shown by myself and other groups have shown that when you have this stronger Euro blocking Siberian high, that's conducive to transferring more energy from the troposphere to the stratosphere, and you get this weakening of the polar vortex, and then that can propagate down and have impacts on the mid-latitudes. It's been associated with the Arctic Oscillation, a negative Arctic Oscillation, but it doesn't necessarily have to project on the Arctic Oscillation. And then, so there's the stratospheric pathway. We also talk about a tropospheric pathway. That's certainly gotten a lot of attention in the public and the news about a slower jet, a wavier jet, more blocking, leading to more extreme weather. Okay, my cartoon here is related to snow cover, but there's been similar research and ideas put forth related to Arctic sea ice, very similar thing. So you can see maybe here a little bit this Euro blocking Siberian high. That's a Z500, both in the observations and in the modeling. And you can kind of see this weakening of the polar vortex up here and then this downward propagation. But Jean Darwin, I think, will talk about a little bit less. And just, wrapping up my part of the talk. So, but there are a lot of challenges with finding these Arctic mid-latitude linkages. A very short time series and observations, right? So as Arctic application only emerged since 1990. That's 20 odd years, closing in on 30, but not a very long time to compute to demonstrate statistical significance. But there's also lack of observation. I don't know if I have that in my later bullet points, but the observations are not alone in having challenges. The model we know there are model deficiencies. Up till now, there have been uncoordinated modeling studies. I hope we'll hear more about that in a little bit. Also, there are biases and uncertainty, in the metrics that we use for when we do analysis, of this topic. And just finally, the climate system is very complicated. It's just again, another kind of cartoon showing all the different things that we're trying to, that do influence or potentially influence the mid-latitude weather, here being Arctic amplification, this box over on the left. But, there's other parts of climate change going on, change the cryosphere, changes in the jet stream, and there's a lot of natural variability. And the natural variability, and certainly in the mid-latitudes, is quite large. So I think that ends my portion of the talk, and it kind of segues into Gudrun's talk.